You might remember us, the ones in the red shirts.
We can't afford guns being the leading cause of death for children and teens in this country.
Whether you're Republicans or Democrats, you can't look away.
We're not going to shut up until we get the change we deserve.
Thoughts and prayers are no longer enough. We need to take action now.
You didn't get this far by saying you can't. You didn't get this far by just being mediocre. You moms demand action, and that's what we demand.
Welcome to Movement Builders, a show about the people ending gun violence in America. All of us.
I'm Kaylin Ford.
And I'm Nikita McDaniel. Y'all, get ready, because today's conversation is a behind-the-scenes look at the work of the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives, and what they do to solve gun crimes, including gun trafficking. And we've got a guest with us here today who has been on the front lines of so many operations to keep guns out of the hands of criminals over the past 20 years.
That's right, Nikita. We're honored to be joined by Marianna Mitchem, Everytown for Gun Safety's Senior Firearms Industry Advisor. Before joining Everytown, Marianna spent 2 decades at ATF, most recently serving as the agency's Associate Assistant Director of Field Operations. In that role, Marianna directed all regulatory operations, conceptualized and executed ATF's Crime Gun Intelligence Analytics Program, and spearheaded the research documented in the National Firearms Commerce and Trafficking Assessment. Now, she's helping to lead our work to hold the gun industry accountable and gun dealers responsible for their role in fueling America's gun violence crisis. Welcome to the show, Marianna.
Yes, welcome to the show, Marianna. It's been a long time coming. We are so excited to have you with us today. And Marianna, we know that you have so much wisdom to share with us, but let's just start with what brought you to this movement.
Thank you guys so much for having me here. I am truly honored to be on this show with you guys today and to talk about something that I am super passionate about, stopping and preventing firearms trafficking.
Yes.
I joined the ATF very shortly after I graduated from college. I really didn't know what I wanted to do when I was about to graduate from college, and I sought out the services of my school's career guidance office. And after meeting with them, I was able to kind of talk about where I came from, right? So I went to Providence College, but I'm from Colorado. When I was in high school, I was a junior in high school in 1999 when the Columbine shooting happened.
Yes.
Columbine High School shooting. That school was in my community. I grew up in Littleton, Colorado. That was sort of like a sister school to the high school that I went to, Chatfield High School. Chatfield, my school, was actually built because Columbine had become too overcrowded.
Wow.
Littleton is a wonderful place to grow up, so people were moving in, people were having families, and so they needed another school, so hence Chatfield was built. So when that shooting happened, I was at school, I watched it unfold on television, and me and my friends and my classmates were just terrified because we all knew the Columbine kids. Most of us had dozens and dozens of very close friends over there. I was a soccer player and a basketball player, and many of my club teammates went to Columbine. So watching that unfold, everything that happened afterwards, the Columbine kids came to Chatfield to finish out the school year. We went to school in the morning, they went to school in the afternoon.
Wow.
So it was very much, you were part of it. And I obviously, I am thankful that I went to Chatfield, and obviously I was safe that day, but you just never forget that, right? Especially when it happens to you when you're 16 years old. And so I sort of had that on my mind. A lot of times I wish I didn't, but it's just always there, right? And that never left me when I went off to college. And I just always thought, I'd love to do something that would stop this from ever happening again. And so when my career services told me about the ATF, I really had no idea what it meant. I had no idea what they did, but I started reading and I thought, this could be something that I really love. And it was. For 20 years, it was absolutely awesome. I felt like every day I went to work, I had a purpose. I felt like I was doing good. And then at the end of those 20 years, I got a great opportunity with Everytown to continue in that service. And that's really what I want to do. I just want to serve our country and help make it a safer place.
Wow, you are a rock star in real life. And thank you for sharing your story of how you came to this movement. Your career has had you in the field investigating reckless gun dealers as well as leading operations. Tell us about some of the kinds of things that you saw on your job.
Yeah, so when I started my career with ATF, I was in the field as an industry operations investigator. And essentially what those investigators do is they regulate both the firearms and the explosives industry. So mainly I'll talk about firearms. That really gets into going out to these licensed gun stores and conducting inspections, right? And you're looking at, are they maintaining proper records, right? Are they maintaining the records that the law requires them to maintain that shows us where did they get their guns and who did they sell them to? And did they follow the proper channels when they were selling those firearms? Did they fill out the paperwork correctly? Did they do that vital background check to make sure that person they were selling to was not prohibited? And then you would also look for any possible criminal activity that might be going on there. Does it appear that they have a lot of sales that don't make sense, right? Do they have indicators of red flags?
Yes.
Which I'm sure we'll talk about a little bit more throughout this conversation today. But those are the kinds of things that I did. I've probably personally inspected hundreds, if not thousands, of licensed gun stores. So the way the ATF is set up, we have our regulatory side of the house. Those are our investigators. And we have our criminal side of the house. Those are our special agents. They work hand in hand, right? Hand in glove. A lot of times the investigators will go out, they'll do their inspections, they'll find possible criminal activity, refer it over to their counterparts, the special agents, and then they work hand in hand to develop that criminal investigation. And so in some of those, I went out on search warrants, testified in court several times. One search warrant that really sticks out in my head was we had a young man who was stealing guns. He was stealing machine guns and ammunition, and he happened to be an employee of a licensed gun store. We caught on to him because he was attempting to pull over young women in the middle of the night on the highway. He had fake lights and sirens on his truck, and he was trying to pull them over. So,
oh my God.
We ended up serving a search warrant on his home. He lived with his mom and his younger sister. He was pretty young. His mom and his sister wouldn't come home to open up the door for us because they were at a concert. And they were not going to leave the concert, even though the police were at their home and their son was already sitting behind bars because of his illegal activity attempting to impersonate a police officer and pull over a young lady. Anyways, eventually we got inside the house and we started doing our search, and we found thousands of rounds of ammunition that he had stolen. We found numerous machine guns that he had stolen from the gun store where he was an employee. We are very glad that we were able to stop him and confiscate all of those, the illegal weapons, the illegal ammunition, and ensure that he spent significant time behind bars so he couldn't harm anyone.
Oh, thank you.
It's stunning to hear some of these stories because they are near misses, right? They feel like if there had not been an investigation, if somebody had not been investigating these kinds of folks, that we could unfortunately see some sort of horrible incident of gun violence with these weapons. You know, when someone's stealing guns and ammunition, they're usually not up to doing anything good with them, right? That's pretty basic. And so we often hear that ATF agents like yourself are out there investigating the worst of the worst when it comes to gun traffickers. What kind of crimes do we see trafficked and stolen guns used in, and how do they impact our communities?
Yeah, so I think it's very important when we talk about firearms trafficking for everyone to understand that it is firearms trafficking that fuels community violence. These are the guns that end up in the hands of violent offenders and trigger pullers that terrorize every single community in this country, right? About 88% of the guns that are trafficked end up in the hands of people who cannot walk into a licensed gun store and pass a background check.
That's right.
Those guns that these end users, that's what we call them, these end users of trafficked firearms, when we studied trafficking under the Biden administration, as directed by then President Biden and then Attorney General Merrick Garland, they said, hey, we need to combat firearms trafficking, right? If we're going to decrease violence, if we're going to decrease shootings in our communities, we have to understand it. So that's exactly what we did. We put together a team of experts. I led this team. It included experts from ATF and experts from the academic arena, so lots of different professors across the country. And we studied about 10,000 ATF trafficking investigations. And in that study of 10,000 cases, we found that about 19% of cases involving trafficked firearms resulted in aggravated assaults, 11% involved homicides, 10% involved attempted homicides, and about 15% of trafficked firearms were used in at least one shooting. And that's just what we know, right? There's a lot of shootings that are not reported to the police. There's a lot of shootings that even when they are reported to police, they are not entered into ATF's NIBIN system, which is their ballistic system. So that's the way we know that a shooting occurred. So that 15%, let me put it into context for you. When you look at all crime guns across the country that are recovered and traced, about 6% are linked through that ballistic system to at least one shooting. So this is almost 2.5 times higher.
Right.
So traffickers are obtaining these guns to provide to violent offenders who are going to use them very, very quickly.
Exactly.
And I think it's really striking when we talk about that, because it can sound like an academic exercise to say, where are these guns trafficked from? Where did they start? Where did they end? But on the other end of these are real people's lives. And as you said, the people who are looking for these guns are people who could not walk into a gun store and buy them because they are prohibited purchasers, because they have felony convictions or domestic violence restraining order. And so these trafficked guns are really arming people who are intending to do harm in their communities or to their families or to other people in their lives. And, you know, keeping guns out of the hands of people who shouldn't have them is really one of the fundamental parts of our work as gun violence prevention advocates. You co-authored an in-depth report here at Everytown on gun trafficking, and one line of it really stuck out for me. And it's a great report. We'll make sure to put it in the show notes for folks to read the whole thing. But you and your colleagues wrote that firearm trafficking is a quiet, steady supply chain that moves guns from legal inventory to illegal use. While headlines focus on individual acts of gun violence, the flow of trafficked guns is the current beneath the surface, enabling those acts to occur again and again. Tell us about the systemic nature of this problem and the role that gun dealers play in it.
So we've talked about the end user, right? We've talked about the person who ends up with that trafficked firearm and they use it in a violent crime. How did they get it, right? So when we look at trafficking and we study how do traffickers obtain their weapons, right? Sort of like, think of that trafficker as almost that middleman person. How do they get the weapons that they put into the hands of the trigger puller, of the shooter? Well, the research tells us that the top two methods are unlicensed dealing and straw purchasing, right? So let's talk about those real quick. So unlicensed dealing and straw purchasing is virtually the same thing, because in both cases, the individual, the trafficker, goes into a licensed gun store and buys guns for someone else, right? That is illegal to do that. You cannot do that. There's a question on the form that the customer has to fill out. They have to answer. And that question says, are you the actual buyer of this firearm? Meaning, are you buying it for yourself? It is illegal to buy a gun for someone else. And so when they are answering yes to that, they are lying on that form. But let's take it a step further. When the gun store has reason to believe that they are lying, now the gun store is also engaging in illegal activity. They are aiding and abetting in a legal purchase, right? And so the difference with unlicensed dealing and straw purchasing is the straw purchaser goes into that gun store and they buy a gun specifically for someone else. They know exactly who they're buying that gun for. The unlicensed dealer knows that they are going to buy that gun and sell it. They just don't know who exactly yet, right? So very, very similar things. Those two methods are the top two methods of trafficking. The trafficker, they're deceiving the gun store, right? They're lying to the gun store owner to obtain these guns. And the trafficker, they can pass a background check. So that's why they're going into this gun store to buy these guns. We need the gun stores to pay attention and to stop the sale when there are obvious red flags.
Yes.
Red flags, you'll hear me say that a lot. Those red flags, both the ATF and the National Shooting Sports Foundation, which is the leading firearm industry association, they teach and train the gun stores, the licensed gun stores, the responsible people, the owners of those gun stores, they teach them what the red flags look like, right? And they're very simple. They are things like bulk purchases. So when I say bulk purchases, that means someone walks into a gun store and buys 10 guns. Guns are expensive, right? That's not a normal purchasing behavior for a law-abiding gun owner, right? guns can vary wildly in price, but $500 on average is a good metric. So think of 10 guns. Who has that amount of money to walk in and just go, I'll take those 10 guns? That's not a normal purchasing habit. So that's one.
Especially if they're all the same, right? Who needs 10 of the exact same handgun? That's also, right?
That is the very next thing, right? We've talked bulk purchases. The next one is buying repeated purchases of the same or similar type of firearms. So you nailed it. When someone comes in and they buy 3 9mm pistols and they come back 4 days later and they buy 4 9mm pistols and they come back 5 days later and they buy 8 9mm pistols, that is not a normal habit of a law-abiding gun purchaser, right? Most law-abiding gun owners think of guns as tools. You'll hear that said all the time, right? It's a tool. And I absolutely agree. It is a tool by a law-abiding citizen. But think about when you go to buy a tool. You got a project at home. Oh, I need a pair of pliers. Do you go and buy 10 pairs of pliers? Or do you buy 1 pair of pliers?
Exactly. Absolutely.
Right? So that's another big indicator. Then you have things like an individual walking in with a shopping list, right? And it could be on their phone. It could be a piece of paper. And they walk up to the counter and they say, I want, one of this, one of that, and one of these. They don't say why. They don't show any interest. They don't ask to handle the firearm. They literally are reading from a shopping list. You have instances where there are multiple individuals that go into a store. You have one individual examining the firearms and picking them out. And then when the paperwork comes, they have the other person step up and fill it out. Oh, no. They're going to have this person's going to buy the guns, right?
Right.
And then you also have things like large cash transactions, right? I know that people still use cash, but largely we're a cashless society, right? And so when someone walks into a gun store and they slap $5,000 in cash on the counter, that's a red flag. I'm not saying any one of those things by itself is illegal, but it is something that the gun store has been trained to take notice of.
Yes.
And they should think twice before they make that sale. There's one other big red flag that I want to point out, and it happens after a sale is made, right? So if a gun store is selling firearms and they're selling to an individual and, they sold a gun and a week later, ATF contacts them to complete a trace request, right? And so that's what happens. When a gun is used in a crime and it's recovered by law enforcement, doesn't matter where in the country, that law enforcement officer can submit that to ATF and say, tell me about this firearm. And they're saying, tell me where it was bought, when it was bought, and who bought it, right? That's an incredible investigative lead for local law enforcement.
Yes.
When they do that, ATF will they'll go through the whole chain, right? The manufacturer, the wholesaler potentially, and then to the last known licensed gun store that had that gun. And they'll call and they'll say, here's the gun information. Tell us who you sold it to. Well, when the gun store owner gets that call and they say, oh my gosh, I sold that gun a week ago, and man, that guy comes in here every 3 days. Maybe at that point, you should say something is off. I'm going to contact my local law enforcement and I'm going to let them know I just got a trace and here's the other guns that this guy's bought and I'm not going to sell him anything else, right? That's what we need to happen. We need to have these gun stores stop making the sales when there are obvious red flags that there's illegal activity going on.
Marianna, thank you so much for that. And these are things that are seemingly common sense, right? And if I am a licensed gun dealer and I'm in business because I want to be a part of my community and be a responsible business owner, it doesn't seem like a lot to ask somebody to keep an eye out for these kinds of signs. But yet in your career in the field, you've seen some wild purchases. Tell us a little bit about some of the things that you've seen, whether it's those bulk sales or those suspicious transactions where somebody is at best looking the other way, at worst completely not caring what the consequences of this is.
Yes.
Yeah, you're 100% right. That was the focus of ATF under the previous administration, was to pinpoint the whole supply chain of trafficking, right? So the end user, that trigger puller, that violent offender that's committing the aggravated assault, that's committing the attempted homicide, we wanted to pinpoint them. We wanted to pinpoint who the trafficker was that was arming them. And we wanted to pinpoint the gun store that was looking the other way and making these sales, right? And let me be crystal clear. There are a lot of great gun stores out there who absolutely do the right thing. I have inspected them. I have talked to them personally. There are lots of great gun store owners out there who, when they see illegal activity, they contact ATF right away, right? They contact their local law enforcement and they say something is off. And it can be even when just an individual comes in and just seems a little bit off, right? Maybe that individual might just be having a bad day. Not sure what exactly is going on, but they just got a bad feeling. They got a bad vibe. They didn't even present one of these red flags. It was just, we sense things, right? Everybody does. And when you're really paying attention, when you're running a business that sells a deadly commodity,
right,
you really have to pay attention. And so they would contact us all the time and say, hey, here's some information I got. Don't worry, I didn't sell them a gun. I've also called some other gun stores in the area to give them a heads up. I don't want anything bad to happen, right? We have to keep in mind that the vast majority of crime guns originate within 25 miles of where they were purchased, right? So if you're a gun store owner and you are looking the other way, you are ignoring illegal activities.
That's right.
Those guns are going to end up in your community. They're going most likely to be used in your community.
Right.
Yes, there is interstate trafficking. Yes, there are a few pipelines out there in the country, but the vast majority, it's within 25 miles of where the gun was bought is where it's used in a crime, right? So as far as what I saw in my career and now I'm still seeing in my new career, there's blatant trafficking going on and people are dying from it. I don't want to be dramatic, but I'll give you a couple quick examples. So one involves a Super Bowl parade shooting. We probably all remember back to Kansas City.
Yes.
In February of 2024, the Chiefs had won the Super Bowl and they were rightfully celebrating and all their citizens were out rightfully celebrating. And at the end of that Super Bowl parade, it turned deadly. Shots were fired.
Yes.
Numerous people were shot. One person lost their life that day. One of the guns that was recovered at that shooting was purchased by an individual who purchased more than 40 guns from 2 gun stores within the greater Kansas City area within a very, very short time frame. This person was actively engaging in trafficking activity.
Right.
This person has been sentenced to 5 years for their activities. The 2 gun stores are still open. So just because this is great, we stopped that trafficker, but there will be another trafficker that pops up to take their place, right? With an endless supply of guns.
Right.
And we talked about those red flags that I mentioned. This individual bought almost the exact same firearm over and over and over again, right? From one gun store, he bought 22 firearms in about 5 months. 20 of them were literally the exact same firearm. 20 of the 22 was the exact same firearm. Here's where it gets even worse. That gun store, remember that trace request that I mentioned?
Yes.
Yes.
They got their first trace request very shortly after that first gun was sold. They ended up getting 6 separate trace requests. But after the first one that had a time to crime of less than 26 days,
Wow.
they proceeded to sell him 15 more guns. Why would you do that? You
Why
know
would you
that
do
you know
that?
that a gun
Why
you
would you
just
do that?
sold him was used in a crime. Why would you do that? The other store that he bought guns from, pretty much the exact same pattern. He bought 10 guns from a second gun store. That gun store received a trace request 8 days after his purchase and proceeded to sell him another 7 firearms. 8 days. Why would you do that? And now people are dead. And there are just countless stories like that over and over and over again. And so at this point, I mean, we have to take the focus on the supply side of trafficking because there is profit in it for the trafficker and there is profit in it from the gun store, right? Think about all those guns that they sold. I have seen gun stores in my career that increase the price of their guns because they are illegally selling to traffickers. And they know the traffickers have the money to sell those guns.
And they're willing to pay more than a legal customer because the illegal customer who's prohibited from having it will pay anything to get their hands on it.
You're exactly right.
It's
You're
true.
exactly right. It happens over and over and over again. We had an individual that we mentioned in that report that you talked about that Everytown published in December. There was an individual in Alabama who bought 224 guns in 11 months, and he was posting them on a social media page, essentially saying no ID required, no paperwork, no background check, and he was selling them to anyone who would buy them. And think about that gun store, 224 guns. You say on average a gun is about $500. I think that's about $90,000. At least that's what he admitted that he paid the gun store. He said he paid $90,000. I mean, whether it's through criminal investigations, legislation, or just plain public pressure, we have to stop these gun stores from prioritizing profit over public safety.
Yes.
That part right there.
Right
Stop
there.
prioritizing that. It's the wrong thing to do. As you were speaking, was thinking about when I joined this movement 12 years ago as a volunteer leader and talking to communities of color. I'm a Black woman. I was an organizer in community, and gun violence was everywhere. When I talked about gun trafficking, and I did not know what I know now or any of what you just said, I just knew about an iron pipeline, and that was fueling gun violence in Black and brown communities. When I would talk about it, that made a connection to people why it was so important for us to join this movement to end gun violence. So just thank you for really laying this out for our audience. I know they'll take this back and have conversations about it too. So we're talking about fueling this community gun violence, and it's in communities of color more than any other place. You've touched on this. I somehow feel like you have more to say, so I'm just going to probe a little bit more. If you could tell us more about where these traffic guns end up, and let's talk about the devastation that they cause, because they do, and it's important that we talk about it more.
Yeah, absolutely. So let me give you some numbers. Between 2017 and 2023, and I use that data because that is the most recent available trace data that the ATF has reported. They have not reported trace data for 24 or 25 yet. But 2017 to 2023, more than 2.3 million firearms were recovered in crimes and traced. A little context with that. Not everybody traces guns. Not every law enforcement department that recovers a gun traces it. About 55% of law enforcement agencies nationwide are part of the tracing system. So that 2.3 million is just what we know. I'm sure it is.
A fraction.
Exactly. There you go. So of those 2.3 million firearms, about 50% of them were recovered less than 3 years after they were purchased. That's called the time to crime. From the date the individual purchased it to the date it was recovered in a crime and traced. That right there is one of the biggest indicators of trafficking for law enforcement. That's a nationally held statistic that everybody has agreed upon, that if that time to crime is less than 3 years, it's an indicator that that firearm was trafficked.
Right.
Of those 2.3 million firearms, 87% were recovered in the possession of someone other than the purchaser.
There you go.
That should paint the picture for you of, hey, these crime guns, they're not just a hunting rifle that somebody bought 10 years ago and it changed hands 12 different times and now it got left in a trash can. That is not what I'm talking about, right?
That's right.
I'm talking about very, very short time to crime firearms. Now, where do they end up? So traffic guns do touch every corner of this country, right? They're recovered in every single community, but primarily we see them being recovered in urban communities, right? There are a couple of well-known pipelines. Like I said before, a lot of guns, the majority are recovered within 25 miles of where they were purchased, but there are a few exceptions to this, right? And so when we look at states that have more restrictive state gun laws than the federal laws, so when I say that, I mean things like universal background checks, extended waiting periods, a limit on how many firearms you can buy a month, things like that, purchase to permit requirements, things like that, that slows down traffickers and they look to go other places, right? So when you look at guns that go into places like New York and New Jersey that have strict gun laws, those are coming from the I-95 pipeline, which is coming from states like Georgia, Florida, South Carolina, North Carolina, and Pennsylvania, and being run up that I-95 corridor into those locations. We also have a pipeline that is fueling crime in Chicago, right? So we call that the Mississippi River Pipeline. And that's coming from states like Mississippi, Indiana, states along that general area that run guns into Illinois and then primarily into Chicago. And those guns, the guns that are trafficked up that Mississippi River Pipeline, about 13% of them are linked to at least one shooting.
Wow.
And I have a perfect example of this. So we had an individual, this was in 2022, an individual was purchasing firearms from a little gun store in Greenville, Mississippi. And if you look at our report, I think we named the gun store. I encourage you to Google it because you will see it's not big, right? You can't claim I didn't know who this person was. It is a small gun store. An individual went in there over about a 3-month time frame, and they bought 23 identical Glock pistols. 3 months, 23 of the exact same thing. And what was happening is those guns were being run from Mississippi straight to Chicago. One of those guns was used in a crime just 1 day after it was purchased, right? And those 23 guns will all be used in crimes over time, right? And so just because at the time that this individual was prosecuted and the individual was prosecuted and convicted, the gun store, nothing happened to them, right? And I would alert folks to look at during that time frame. We have this in our ATF NFCTA report that you mentioned. Look at declinations. So that's when a case is presented to the U.S. Attorney's Office by ATF. Look at the percentage that are declined. That is something that has to change, right? So ATF can investigate it, but if the prosecutor is unwilling to prosecute it, there's nothing you can do at that point, right? But those guns, every single one of those, I guarantee you, every single one that hasn't already been recovered will be, and it will be recovered in a crime, and likely in the Chicago area. Again, 88% of the recipients of trafficked firearms are prohibited from walking into a gun store and buying a gun because they cannot pass a background check, right? These individuals are not paying extra, are not paying over market value for guns because they just want to collect them, because they just want to go hunting. Absolutely not.
That's right.
They are using them to further violent activities.
And I just want to pause for a second here because you mentioned the Kansas City parade shooting, which was an absolutely horrific incident of gun violence that rightfully made the news and that people were outraged and disgusted and horrified by. But we know these traffic guns also end up in things like domestic violence incidents, something that will not make the news, perhaps, but will cause incredible devastation. We know these guns will end up at the scene of community violence, like Nikita was saying, in Black and brown communities where perhaps the shooting never makes the news, but families are devastated. People lose their lives. Entire communities are traumatized. People live with injuries from these shootings. And it's really unconscionable to have stores who are looking the other way at trafficking signs that are so abundantly clear. You don't have to be Nancy Drew to crack that case, right? I'm aging myself here, but you know what I mean? Like we're talking about some pretty obvious things. And I'm glad we have you here with us fighting this good fight. I know a lot of our volunteers are also working to work with responsible gun dealers and to build those relationships in their communities. And that's important work because it can't be that we're just looking at the person who pulls the trigger as the only person responsible for gun violence when we have such a devastating public health crisis in this country that touches, as you said, everyone from rural communities and small towns to big cities.
Yeah, I 100% agree with you. If we are going to continue the good work of the last couple of years and reducing our violent crime rates, we can't lose focus on this work, right? This is, I mentioned before, ATF took an intelligence-led approach to firearms trafficking. So that means instead of just guessing, well, hey, there's a lot of violence in this neighborhood, or maybe we have some known gang activity over here, instead of just guessing or asking, a criminal informant who's obviously got their own reasons that they might be providing certain information, we said, let's look at the intelligence that we know is not lying to us, right? That's crime gun intelligence.
Yes.
ATF championed crime gun intelligence for several years. I helped build our crime gun intelligence analytics system at ATF that said, you don't have to guess. You don't have to listen to a criminal informant. You don't have to target a neighborhood. Target the exact problem, right? You stop the problem, the neighborhood will heal.
That's right.
So that's what we were doing. And ATF has always been under-resourced and underfunded. We decided we will continue to fight that fight. And again, I'm talking previous administration, where we would be asking for more money. We would tell them why we needed it. You know, when I say they, Congress, to fund ATF so that we could hire more people, so that we could do more investigations. But at the same time, instead of just saying, oh, well, they didn't give us our money, so I guess, just status quo, we'll keep, trudging along here. We said, no, let's be smarter. Let's work more efficiently.
Yes.
Because if we can stop a gun store that is supplying 6 traffickers who are then supplying 60 violent offenders,
That's right.
you make a huge difference, right? It's not enough to go after the violent offender. It's like a whack-a-mole game, right?
That's
There's
right.
going to be another person that's going to step up.
That's right.
Let's stop these folks from ever getting guns. And you got to go all the way back the chain. You have to stop the supply side of it.
Absolutely. And I want to keep going up the chain because we know that beyond the gun dealers, we have an entire firearms industry that could be part of the solution when it comes to making sure that guns do not end up in the hands of criminals. But too often, we see that they're part of the problem. Tell us more about the decisions that are being made up the supply chain in gun manufacturers' boardrooms and how they impact gun violence on the ground.
Yeah, I think at all levels in the gun industry, right? It starts with the manufacturer. It starts with the folks that are actually making the products, and then they're putting them out into the retail market, right? A lot of times they do go through a wholesaler, like a lot of different commodities in our country do, but some go direct to that end retailer, right? Where the individual can walk into the store. And so there's obviously a lot going on we have manufacturers that are trying to push firearms that have an even more deadly impact, higher velocity, right?
Military style weapons.
Exactly. Large caliber ammunition, things like that. Things that aren't just going to wound someone, they're going to kill someone, right? In my opinion, we shouldn't have comparable military style weapons on our streets. We shouldn't have individuals with the capability to utilize a military style weapon, right?
That's right.
I think that's going to continue to be an issue. I think when we look at the revenue that these folks are generating, when I talk about that, like, hey, you make money from selling firearms, right? And so if you don't have a moral compass and you have no fear that law enforcement is going to come in and hold you accountable, which I think is going on now because, ATF and a lot of other law enforcement agencies have been redirected to other activities. If these gun stores don't feel like they're going to be held accountable if anyone's watching, and they need to or they want to make money, they're going to continue to churn out firearms. And then they're going to have to order more, right? Because they're selling them as quickly as they possibly can. There was a case a couple years ago that an industry operations investigator uncovered where the gun store owner literally said, oh yeah, I have these couple customers. They come in here so often and they always want the same thing. I can't even get it in stock. And the wholesaler told me to slow down in my orders because they can't get enough of them from the manufacturer. So every level in this chain is profiting, right? From the manufacturer to that end retail dealer. And so again, obviously our space here, it's not our job to help the gun industry be profitable.
That's right.
I don't have a problem with them being profitable, but I have a problem with them being profitable when people in our communities are dying and paying the price for it.
Absolutely. And like you said, it can't be out of the goodness of their heart. We have to have laws, we have to have policies, we have to have consequences. We're not just hoping people do the right thing when it comes to selling lethal weapons to people who intend to do harm with them. Marianna, you mentioned this, but we've seen this administration chip away at ATF's power, whether it's through funding cuts or diverting folks who are supposed to be enforcing our gun laws so they can be part of immigration operations alongside ICE agents. How is that impacting public safety?
So ATF is the only federal agency that regulates the firearm industry. Just let that sink in for a minute. That means if ATF isn't doing it, no one is doing it.
That's right.
Right? And so If you are diverting resources away from that critical activity, there's no one to fill in the gap. As we see folks leaving federal service for a variety of different reasons, I don't believe this administration has any intention of hiring any new industry operations investigators, right? Those folks that do the critical work, that go into the gun stores and make sure the gun owners are abiding by the laws and the regulations, but also uncovering criminal activity, right? Uncovering trafficking patterns, but they'll uncover it and they'll also educate that gun store owner, right? That gun store owner might not realize, oh my gosh, I didn't even think about that being a red flag, right? I didn't notice that that person was engaging in that kind of activity. And so that is absolutely critical work that needs to be done. If the administration walks away from that, everyone involved in that trafficking chain is going to know about it.
That's right.
Traffickers will be emboldened and the gun stores will be emboldened. And I really fear that we are going to see these huge decreases in our violent crime rates start to tick back up, right? We have lots of other things going on in this country that can lead to a surge in violence. And certainly the traffickers being able to arm everyone who wants to commit acts of violence is not going to help things, right? Trafficking does take time, right? I gave some examples of a 1-day time to crime, of an 8-day time to crime, and that absolutely does happen. But remember I said that big stat, 50% of that 2.3 million had a time to crime of less than 3 years.
Yeah.
Right.
So we're going to see this over the next couple of years, right? I don't think we're going to see something that like, hey, in 6 months, it's, oh my God, we have a horrible problem. I think that oh my God moment is coming in a couple of years, right? And it will be very hard when you redirect resources like they're doing, and you're not hiring and you're not backfilling critical positions. That's not something that can be corrected on day one of a new administration.
That's right.
That is going to take time. You've got to recruit the right people to do these jobs, right? And I can tell you, a lot of people that I talk to, a lot of friends, a lot of family, a lot of neighbors, there's no trust in the federal government anymore.
Yeah.
Who's going to want to come and work for a federal agency under a new administration? People are going to be fearful, right? So I see there being a lot of long-term impacts. And it's ultimately why at this point, we don't have the luxury of waiting to see what happens in 2.5, 3 years. We need to act now. We need our states to start acting and start filling in those critical gaps that the federal government has walked away from.
Yes. We definitely have put ourselves on the map for focusing on reducing gun trafficking and pushing dealers to be more responsible. That's a big part of our work this year. And you just started going into it, so I just want you to continue to elaborate on how our volunteers and community partners on the ground can actually get involved.
Yeah, I think there's a lot everybody can do, right? And there's a lot of different ways that you can do this work. So in states that have already passed state dealer licensing and state dealer inspection laws, that's fantastic. That is absolutely great work. A lot of those laws require common sense measures, like having safety and security measures at the gun store. Think about that.
Yes.
Federal law has no laws that says how you have to secure your business. Your business that's filled with a deadly commodity. No laws. But in states where you pass these laws or you haven't, you should really start pushing for those. Things like security cameras, alarm systems, put the guns in a safe at the end of the night, bars on the windows, simple things, right? Things that a lot of people do in their own homes.
Right.
But we don't mandate that gun stores do. So the states, if they haven't done that, they should absolutely be looking to pass dealer accountability, industry accountability laws. Those things also go into requiring background checks for the gun store owner and their employees. Right? That's a big gap. People don't realize that with federal licensing, it's only the owners that have a background check done. The employees, that sales clerk that's standing out on the sales floor selling guns, they've had no background checks.
That's wild.
It's wild.
And they're not even required to have any training. When ATF goes out and does their inspections, they have to meet with the gun store owners. That's where all this communication happens. It doesn't happen with the employees unless the gun store owner says, hey, can my employees sit in because I want them to learn this? And in that case, that's fantastic. ATF always wants that, but that is not always the case, right? And so states need to pass these simple measures to require, hey, employees, you need to be trained, you need to have a background check. And that training would include these red flags, right? And then there's things like pushing your state legislators to pass common sense measures like universal background checks. If you're in a state where that is not required, I can almost guarantee you, without even looking at the map, that you have an intrastate trafficking problem, meaning it's homegrown. Traffickers are buying guns in your state to sell to violent end users in your state. It's your own problem, right? Pass universal background checks. And I'm not saying that the trafficker is going to abide by that, but what I am saying is when they don't, law enforcement has a very easy statute and charge to put on that individual.
Right.
Instead of trying to say, this person was trafficking guns and I got to prove it and I got to go get all this documentation. And it's a complicated, time-consuming investigation. Instead, you can go, they sold a gun without doing a background check, right? That's a felony.
Right.
That is an easy way to combat that problem. So I would just encourage volunteers to put pressure on your state and local lawmakers.
Yes.
To either make sure they're enforcing these laws that they have on their books, and if they don't have these laws, that they're pushing to get them on their books. The other big thing I have to mention is law enforcement's role in this. There's a couple big things that we need to make sure we're asking our police departments to do. And volunteers, go, this is your police department. They represent you. They're protecting you. Go have a conversation with them.
Yes.
Ask them, are you tracing crime guns? Are you signed up on ATF's free web-based platform known as eTrace? Do you trace guns? If they say yes, that's great. Follow it up with, do you trace every gun that you recover in a crime?
Yes.
Right? Because it's not enough just to trace the ones used in homicides or ag assaults. You got to trace the guns that are recovered in any sort of crime because they're going to be an investigative lead, right?
Yes.
They might
Right.
tell you something about a homicide that you're investigating. The next big thing is, have you opted into collective data sharing? And I know people get really nervous when we talk about data sharing right now. This is not data sharing with the federal government. This is data sharing on your crime gun traces with all the other law enforcement agencies in your state.
Right.
This has been something that's been available for decades that
Right.
ATF has pushed because when a gun is recovered in your jurisdiction, right? I'm here in Denver. Let's say a gun is recovered in Denver. If I opt into collective data sharing and my partner in Colorado Springs opts into data sharing, they're going to be able to see that recovery, and that might have a detail that's associated with one of their cases.
Right.
Right? Because guns do not know jurisdictional lines, right? Got to
right.
make sure that we are sharing our data. When we do that, we can use crime gun intelligence at the local level, just like ATF was using in the previous administration, right? We can use that to identify the trigger pullers, the traffickers, and the gun stores that are supplying them. And then the last thing is, volunteers, please push your departments to make sure they are utilizing NIBIN. Don't worry about knowing what the acronym stands for. Just know that it is ATF's ballistics system. What it does is, when a gun is used in a shooting, when those casings are recovered and they're put under a microscope and entered into a system, law enforcement can identify whether or not the same gun, even though they haven't recovered it, has been used at a separate shooting incident, right? And so you start to link together shootings, and from that, you start to link together critical, viable investigative leads that might put you down the path of the shooter, right?
Yes.
Right.
Obviously, once you get the gun, you test fire the gun, and now you're able to say, oh my gosh, that gun's been used in 4 shootings, and we
Right.
traced it, so we know who bought it, and we know when they bought it, right? Let's go have a little
right.
chit chat with that person that bought the
That's
gun,
right.
right? Those are critical things that I can't stress enough. Please, volunteers, go out there, have a conversation with your law enforcement officers in your community, ask for a meeting with the chief of police, and push these things because they will save lives.
Absolutely. These are just common sense things, right? And what we're talking about, I think sometimes people assume that there is a lot more coordination and data sharing, and everybody watches CSI and they assume that like somebody's got all this information. But why would we not want to share information that could help solve unsolved gun crimes, that could give families the opportunity to bring a perpetrator to justice? Why would we not want to do that, right? Like that just is common sense. Thank you so much, Marianna, for sharing with us those ways that folks can get involved in their communities. And you're right, local law enforcement can be such an incredible ally to us in this fight. And providing that grassroots support and meeting with them and having those conversations is so important. We also know that this is a huge election year, right? The 2026 midterms are huge. We have an opportunity to really make an impact, and we have volunteers across the country who are already out there doing that work. Talk a little bit about why it's so important to elect gun sense candidates when it comes to passing the kinds of anti-trafficking policies that you were talking about, and also why it's so important to hold people who have failed to act thus far accountable.
Yeah, this is a huge year. This, to me, all comes down to we have a proven way we can combat firearms trafficking, right? It's through using crime gun intelligence to pinpoint who these players are and then holding them accountable, right? You can't just go far enough to say, okay, we know who's doing this. We need to ensure that they are stopped from doing it. And if our legislators are unwilling to take this up, if they are unwilling to put the right people in positions across the board, right? Whether it's our U.S. attorneys, whether it's our folks at ATF, we need to make sure they're funded properly. We need to make sure that they are prioritizing properly. If they are not willing to do these simple things that we know will work, and I say we know they'll work because we did it for a couple of years at ATF, and we were getting even better at it. Just when things changed. So if folks aren't willing to support that and to support it with funding and to push more industry accountability laws and to pass laws that we know will work, right? When we talk about firearms trafficking, I talk about things like intrastate, meaning it happens within your own state, and interstate, right? We know why there are differences. This isn't a guess. This isn't a fluke. We have studied this. We have used the best researchers and academics that we have in this country on this topic to study this. And so we know that when you pass things like universal background check laws, trafficking doesn't occur in that state. It requires traffickers to leave the state. Imagine if we did that nationwide.
Right. Absolutely.
I mean, that would be amazing.
Yes, we will save lives.
Yes, 100%. So in my opinion, if we don't have folks in this country that are supposed to be leading this country and supposed to be putting us all in a safe environment where we are able to succeed, they have to go. We have to find people that will do the right thing.
That's right. We'll replace them.
Absolutely. No other developed country in the world has this rate of gun violence, right? And we now have proven, and we were fortunate enough to have on Greg Jackson and Rob Wilcox earlier on in the podcast to talk about the White House Office of Gun Violence Prevention. But we have proven that when we run our playbook, right, in the White House, at ATF, in states with strong gun laws, that lives are saved, that violent crime is reduced. Why would we not keep doing that, right? Why would we want to make it easier for people who should not have guns to get their hands on them? It makes absolutely no sense. And so thank you for that, Marianna. We are going to be fighting the good fight all the way till Election Day to get folks who will take this crisis seriously and run the playbook we know saves lives, because we've already written the playbook. It's very simple.
Gosh, I feel like I need a bumper sticker for that. Run the playbook that we know saves lives. And that's what we're doing. So our next question, which is one of my favorites, because I'm all into taking care of ourselves. You do not get away from this. All of our podcast guests have to answer this question. The work that we do is so heavy, and it's very important work. What do you do, Marianna, to take care of yourself?
I love that question, actually. I mentioned I'm here in Colorado. I grew up in this state. If you love the outdoors like I do, there's no better place to live in the country, in my opinion. So I make sure that every single weekend, I try and literally never miss a weekend. Every single weekend, I get out in the mountains and I do something physical. I go skiing. Didn't do much of that this year, though, because we didn't get any snow.
That's wild.
But I go hiking, I go trail running. In the summers, we go camping. I love to get out where there's no service and I can completely recharge. And I think that's why I just keep going, right? Like, I get a fresh start every Monday. I'm like, okay, that felt good. I cleared my head and I'm back and I'm focused and hoping to be able to make a difference. So I'm just going to keep up that sort of training plan that I have, because for 20 years it's been working. So I'm going to keep doing it.
You passed the test. Very proud of you. Self-care is very important. And I also say we take care of ourselves and we take care of each other. Thank you for doing that for yourself.
The world can feel pretty heavy right now. And I'm sure that as somebody who spent 20 years of their career in service to the government, to keeping people safe, to keeping communities safe, it can feel really frustrating to watch somebody dismantle that or attempt to dismantle that. It can feel really heavy to watch federal agencies being used to prioritize or carry out the wrong things when we know there's much more urgent, real problems that we should be tackling. How do you remain hopeful even in these kinds of challenging times that we're living through at this moment?
It's hard sometimes, right?
Yes.
You get really frustrated.
Yes.
I'll be honest, I never saw myself doing anything else. I never thought that I thought I would, in my career, in my 60s, hopefully at ATF, but it just didn't work out that way. And so while we're going through some difficult times right now, I just try and remember that we do know this playbook, like you just mentioned. I felt so good about what we were doing at ATF the last couple of years. We were focusing on the right things for the right reasons. We were being efficient. We were using the taxpayers' precious money to solve violent crime, prevent violent crime. I believe that we've cracked the code. I really do.
Yes.
And I know that a lot of people will say I'm naive or, maybe I'm a dreamer, but we were doing it.
Yes.
And I'm hopeful because I know when we get a chance to get back at it, we're ready to go.
Yes.
We don't have to search for a way. How are we going to combat this? We know what to do. And so I am hopeful. And we're resilient people, right?
Yes, we are.
I believe that we can weather just about anything because we come together in those hard times. And you could already see it happening in communities across this country. We'll continue to come together and we'll persevere. We'll get through this and then we'll get right back at it. And we'll make sure that we start right where we left off.
Marianna, you are someone after my own heart. And it's okay to be a dreamer because guess what? You're not just a dreamer. You are a planner. And that is how we make dreams come true. And I want to just tell you thank you again for joining us and to ask you if there is anything else that you would like to say to our amazing volunteer leaders and our community partners. Any last imparting words for them?
I just want to thank everyone. I want to thank each and every person for their dedication and hard work to make our country safer for every single person that lives here. Their unwavering commitment to this cause is truly inspirational. I did not know how big this movement was until I was able to come on board last year. And it's amazing. It's one of the things that keeps me going because I meet the moms, I meet the students out there, and I'm floored at how passionate they are. And they're willing to do anything and everything. They're willing to show up in Santa Fe at a legislative hearing at 1:00 in the morning after they've sat there for 10 hours to speak their 1-minute truth. And it's just fantastic. So I just want to thank all of them.
And we want to thank you because you bringing your gifts and your skills and your talents and your expertise to this movement is making us stronger. And like you said, we all have a different part to play in making our community safer for every single person that lives there.
Yes.
Because it's not good enough for us to say, well, my family's safe, but somebody else isn't. We have to be working on this so that everybody can live without the fear of gun violence in their lives.
And as the young folks say, period.
Exactly. Thank you, Marianna, for joining us on the podcast. We are so thrilled. This was such a powerful conversation.
Yeah, thank you guys.
Yes, you're so amazing. Y'all, this was an incredible deep dive into the issue of gun trafficking. and our work to hold the gun industry accountable for its role in gun violence. I'm excited to see this work move forward and excited that we have folks like Marianna on our team.
Me too. And I'm grateful for the folks in our movement who are already doing pieces of this work across the country. All of it matters, and all of it helps to counteract the chaos and carelessness we're seeing in our country right now. So thank you all for continuing to fight the good fight, even when it's hard. And if you're new to this movement or new to this podcast, you can text READY. Again, it's READY to 64433 to get more involved.
Yes, we got to keep fighting the good fight and keep supporting each other. So please, keep reaching out to us with your shout outs and stories for the podcast. Send us a note at movementbuilders@everytown.org. Again, it's movementbuilders@everytown.org. We love hearing from you.
Thanks for listening to Movement Builders, y'all. I'm Kaylin.
And I'm Nikita. Thank you for all you do to save lives. It's working.